So this is probably one of the toughest things for me to talk about, um, but it's really at the core of a lot of things when it comes to mgtow, when it comes to being a man, when it comes to social expectations, societal expectations. Um, it's hard for me to compartmentalize this in my head because of so much pain, you know, emotional pain. So I guess the best way for me to talk about it is to describe my experience with it. Um, and to do that, I need to sort of delve into my history. Um, and I want to do it as briefly as I can because I have a long history. And in other videos, vlogs that I've tried to do, I found myself talking for way too long because I have such a long history. So I'm going to try to summarize and jump to the quick. So my story, and I have to talk about my story just for a second to sort of highlight what I'm going to talk about. My story is that, you know, I was born to parents who were struggling, not only with their marriage, but financially, and I would even say socially to some extent, although they were Christians and they were very church oriented for a while, um, which is not quite the same type of social environment. So it's not quite the same as a lot of people grow up in. But that notwithstanding, I think that it's cleaner because the time that my father exited from the church, he wasn't spiritually motivated. He wasn't motivated by the same kind of Christian morals that most of the people were motivated by. So, in that sense, I consider him to be more like people in society. Just there's a lot of people out there who are struggling, who are having a hard time, whether it's through addiction or whether it's through circumstantial, hardships, going without, etc. There's a lot of people out there, and unfortunately, that's not something that we want to help out in our society. And some people might argue that objectively and say, well, we've got social programs, well, we've got, charities, etc. That's true. We do. And there is help for people. But what I mean is socially, I mean, as far as how we interact with each other, we tend to not want to talk to the homeless person. We tend to not want to get close to the homeless person when we're walking downtown or wherever, right? We look at them like they're different species. And I know I do that, and it's scary when you think about what you're doing and you're driving by people and you're like, those are people, but yet we don't think of them as the same type of people as other people. We think of like, oh, there's something wrong with them. They're homeless. There's something scary about that. I never want to be homeless. So it's something that I don't even want to think about. And we just, ooh, there's this type of horror when we think about those type of people. So socially, we don't treat people who have hardships the same as people who are, gliding through life or going through life, whether it's super successfully or whether they're just, maintaining and they had a good job and they're kind of at an even keel and an even level. We treat people differently based on their circumstances. So I had a father who was a very depressed person. His father abused him physically, not sexually or anything else, but his father was just physically abusive. He would beat him sometimes, not often, but it happened. And He was the runt of the family. He came along. He was sort of unexpected. He came along when my grandfather didn't have a lot of money to support another child. So my father was sort of unwanted from birth, although he had a very supportive, loving mother who was a Christian, and that as much as he was normal, that probably is the reason why. His father just, he wasn't horrible to my father, but um, he had some level of disdain for my father. And that caused my father to have he didn't feel love the same way. He didn't, he had issues because of that. And then alcohol came along, and he was a child of the 60s and the 70s where rebellion was cool. So he rebelled, and he never really lost that rebel spirit, even though he quote unquote saw the light and got saved and had a conversion experience of salvation and came into the church. That didn't necessarily reform him fully. He went through a type of spiritual enlightenment, personal spiritual enlightenment, and that's when he met my mother, and she thought he was so spiritual and great, so she married him. And it must have been meant to be, because they had 3 kids. At least as far as that, must have been meant to be, and us kids must have been meant to be here. Or you could say we were, we shouldn't be here. I don't know, but it's not the point. We're here. And then he started to descend slowly. He started going back to alcohol a little bit, drinking here and there, and alcohol was his buddy. Alcohol was his antidepressant. And this happens for a lot of people. Robin Williams, Al Pacino, Michael Douglas, lots of people. I'm just naming off, Marlon Brando maybe, but I'm naming off famous people just because it's like that's who we relate to. But we all know somebody who loves alcohol, who's an alcoholic, right? It's very common. Alcoholism is very common. For some reason, with some people, when they drink, it just clicks in their brain and they feel better. I had a friend who was, I believe, an alcoholic, or had the makings of an alcoholic. He would go to the bar, go to the pub or whatever, and drink 4 days a week. Of course, he was from England, and that's a bit of culture over there. That's just kind of what they do over there in England. They go to pubs, but very much culture in the UK. But it's a common thing: alcoholism or borderline alcoholism, or drinking, to make yourself feel better, drinking to make yourself more social. It's a lot more common than people talk about. I don't talk about it. I don't think about it because of not only what I went through with my father. I personally don't like alcohol. It's just the way it is. I don't like the way I feel. I don't necessarily like the way it's all right. It tastes okay. But I just don't like the way I feel when I drink. So I don't talk about it much, but a lot of people out there are alcoholic, right? So my father descended into alcoholism slowly but surely, and that broke up their marriage. My mother had a big problem with that. She felt socially that he shouldn't do that. She felt that he was a bad influence for the children, that we saw him descending, and she was afraid that we would have bad character, and we would follow after that and lose people ourselves, and that's a good thing to fear. That's an honorable concern. She wasn't just going to let him. Really, what it was is he was depressed. He had depression, and she didn't know how to deal with it and address it. And because the alcohol was prevalent, she tried to fight the alcohol instead of the underlying cause, which was that he was abused, and she didn't know how to do any of that. She was too young, or she just didn't know. She didn't know how to deal with somebody. She had been through a bunch of other marriages and a bunch of other guys. She was a bit loose herself when she grew up in Seattle. And so they didn't have the type of love where she could say, hey, you have a problem, you need to go get help. They weren't that type of mature. Okay. They just unfortunately didn't have that kind of maturity, that didn't have that kind of forethought, or, you know, they just didn't. And it sort of reminds me of people from this generation. If something is starting to go downhill a little bit, they will just chalk it up and quit. But she didn't really quit, though. That's the thing, is that she didn't, she lost love for him. She it was hard for her to love, I think, because of, going through some things that she went through, growing up as a child. And I think it's harder for women to love in the same way that men love. But so, trying to make this as short as I can, but the the result basically was that she tried to fight him into fixing him. She tried to fight him into making him better. He was never really abusive. He was a sort of mild charactered man. He was a strong, willed man. He was a hard worker. But he was never physically abusive, which I'm thankful for. Never really physical abusive. There were times when he spanked us and yelled and things like that, but he had a temper. He would get angry, but he was never, purposely aggressively abusive. Physically abusive. Anyway, so it didn't work out. He didn't reform. He didn't change. He didn't stop drinking. She didn't have the tools to fix him. And they were carrying on in a marriage that was falling apart by the seams, for 5 or 10 years, basically, for a while. And eventually it got worse and worse. And eventually, he just left. We all felt that it was good that he leave. I was a young boy at that time. And so, it was the biggest event in my life. It was the biggest thing and it was so close to home, and that was my father. And I had always known that my father was, I always knew that my parents and my family was different. We were the bad people on the block. We would yell and blah, blah. And it was weird because we still had a kind of love. He was still an interesting person. He would play guitar and he would sing, and he had a type of he was kind of a Woody Guthrie type character. And I loved him for that. But I mean, I would have loved him anyway, probably as much as I could have. But he was unique in that sense, that he was kind of a quiet, brooding, kind of a Woody Guthrie type character. And he had a nice insight, and he had a nice way of talking to us children at times, but he worked hard. He had to work hard to support us. And the type of jobs, he was never very educated. He was never very, book smart, intelligent, although he was smart and he did read and he did go and get, type of degree at some point, but he was never like obviously, that type of intelligent where he could go work at Boeing or something like that. It was very difficult for him to find a good job to pay for us. So this is something that set the stage for me, to realize that there's a lot of pain in the world, and to realize that it's not roses and bubblegum for everybody. And I happened to be one of the people that it wasn't, and it was hard. It was very, very hard, and it ostracized me socially from kids. I was a very social kid, and I was a very kind of what's the word? I was very kind of in your face. I was very capricious. I was kind of a capricious kid. And then later on, as I grew older, after these things happened, things like that, I sort of turned into more of an introvert. But I was always running around and laughing and hanging out with kids at school and things like that. So it didn't hit me. It hit me hard because of my personality that I liked to be popular. I liked to be, you know, one of the cool kids. I wanted to be one of the cool kids, in school. And I enjoyed that. And so it hit me hard because if I would have just been like, well, I don't care about that. I'm an introvert. I'm a bookworm or whatever. Probably would have hit me better. And I could have focused on, studying, which is what my sister did, who she eventually became, became an electrical engineer. She eventually became an environmental engineer. She's not necessarily an introvert, but she found her outlet in reading and studying and things like that. And it didn't hit me the same way. I was always into sports. I love football. I love baseball. I love basketball. And that was my goal, was to play sports and to be popular. And it was hard because I went through harsh social ostracizing because I knew what was going on at home. I knew how damaged and bad our family was. And there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of shame. So that carried over into my social life, and that damaged and affected my social life greatly. I had a lot of good characteristics as a, sports athlete. I was magnanimous. I was funny. I wasn't mean. I wasn't cocky like a lot of these sports athletes are. I probably would have been a good mayor or a good politician. I really talked to people. People followed me. People liked me because, a lot of it was because, and I talk about this in other videos, a lot of it was just because I was on the basketball team. And it wasn't really anything I did. But I also think some people liked me. They liked how I was kind of like a Jimmer Fredette. If you watch Jimmer Fredette, even though he didn't make it quite in the NBA, he's a very like eclectic person where he's very he'll talk to lots of people, very down to earth, very smiley. People can follow him easily, and they can respect that he's a great talented athlete, and it's easy to be his fan. Right. And that's kind of how I was for a while. But eventually it took its toll. The pain from not having a father turned into anger, not having a respectable father, or a father that dissolved and left, and that turned into anger, which turned into sort of resentment, which turned into depression myself. Right. So these things are cyclical. My father didn't feel loved by his father, and he became depressed, and it turned inward. And then, he had a hard life, became an alcoholic. His marriage dissolved. His kids watched this. They got hurt, eventually angry, and then that turned into depression, which turned inward. And like they say, depression is just pain and hurt turned inward, right? If you study depression and things like that. So this is what I went through. Now, let me talk about why that, harmed me. And let me get into what actually happened for that to harm me. So eventually, my depression sort of expressed itself through me partying, through me hanging out with bad kids, through me drinking. Even though I didn't really even like alcohol, I was experimenting with it. And mind you, I had very much, I was physically, I was physically able to party on the weekends and then wake up and go play basketball and it was like a lot of kids do that. I don't know if you watch that movie, Basketball Diaries. That was kind of my life, Basketball Diaries. And the irony is I had actually seen that movie before I entered high school, and I still got corrupted and followed that route. A lot of people do it. A lot of people can actually do it too. A lot of these sports stars, these NBA players, they'll burn the candle at both ends, and they get away with it for some reason. They just are strong physically, strong mentally. Me, I eventually broke. I started drinking too hard. I would have blackouts, and it became for some reason, my crowd just got more and more corrupted. The crowd that I was hanging out with, the group that I was hanging out with. And then it became like, it went from let's drink a few beers to let's pound some hard liquor and let's do that every weekend. Let's go party every weekend. And then eventually it sort of started like, hey, let's do some cocaine, or hey, let's do weed, etc. And I never got into that heavy stuff like cocaine or anything, but I would do weed every once in a while. And I believe that it harmed me at that age. I believe that it affected me at that age. People say, oh, weed doesn't do anything, but I believe it did. And then, mushrooms were going around, and I eventually did some mushrooms. It was offered to me, and I did some. And I think that it damaged my brain, and I became really depressed. I spiraled out, and I didn't really recover from that. I think that I had hurt my brain on some level. And it's a big theory, like why it happened and how I became sick. And there's different theories, but my mom and I had formulated over the years. And she thinks that it has to do with I had several concussions before I was even 10 years old. I think I had 3 major concussions. One was when I was a baby. My father had me on his car, and it was like a Volkswagen Bug, Volkswagen Beetle or whatever, and I slid down the back of a car and hit my head, and I still have the mark. It's not even a mark. It's like a little. It's not that big actually now, but apparently my head was cracked open. I hit the pavement, and I was a little baby, and so I think I had to have stitches, and it was right on my forehead. And then the other one was when I think I was 5, or no, I think I was 3, and I rolled down some stairs and hit my head at the bottom of the stairs, and it was a huge fall. Like, it was really loud. You could hear it throughout the whole house, and it was at somebody else's house. But terrible head concussion there. And then the third one was when I was at this, like, they call it Awana. It's actually, I loved Awana. It's like kind of like the Boy Scouts, but a little different. And it's like where I think it's through some type of church where like you go and you do these like good deeds, and then you get awards for it, and you get this little vest. It's really cool for kids. I loved it. And it's one of the first things that taught me the reward system, the work hard, for a reward. It taught me to like achieving things, and taught me to like doing good and being good. And it was really positive, really wonderful. But I was at this Awana Club meeting, and these kids they were playing this game where like they had some candy, and they were like circling around, and they had some candy in the middle of the circle, and they were darting in to grab the candy, and there's like a challenge for who can dart in and grab the candy. It was really weird. Like, I don't even know what that's all about. Like, but that's what they did, and it was kind of creepy if you think about it in certain ways. Like, you're teaching children to compete with each other for candy. It's weird. I don't know, but that's what they were doing. And so I ran in to get some candy, and this other big kid ran in. We were both big kids. I was a big kid, real tall and burly kind of kid, and we both ran in, and we bumped heads, and it was really, really loud, and it was powerful force. We hit heads, and then after that, I started to have like night terrors. And if you Google night terrors, it's when kids are, they wake up in the middle of the night, and they have these weird, surreal nightmares and things like that. So that predisposed me to being weaker, I believe, because it was always harder for me when I was partying with my friends in high school. It was always harder for me to recover. They would wake up the next morning and be totally recovered, be totally fine. And for me, it took me like 2 or 3 days to get fully recovered. So I sort of knew that I was strong, and I had a lot of energy, and I was great at running, and I was a good athlete, but I didn't have the mental fortitude that even my friends had who weren't athletes. They could go and party. And this is why some people party their whole lives. I think I read somewhere that Woody Harrelson partied like until he was 50 or something. And finally he said, I gotta quit weed and all this stuff. Some people just party like it's a lifestyle. They just party like it's a hobby or something. And, I couldn't do it. I couldn't hang even with the kids who weren't athletes because I was damaging myself. I was damaging my body. I was damaging my brain, drinking hard alcohol. And, it was bad. It was wrong. And it was wrong on a lot of different levels. And most of all, I was hurting myself more than anybody. And I did. And I got sick and I got closed off and depressed. And that was around the time that I moved. A lot of the motivation for me moving from the east side of Washington to the west side of Washington was to get a different environment so that I could live a more positive life and get away from those type of kids. And it worked, but the time that I put in had its toll. Time that I put in partying had its toll, and I was depressed. And I did try antidepressants. I did try Prozac and I think Paxil, and they helped, but they didn't heal me. They helped me feel better, but they didn't heal me. I believe I had damaged some brain tissue or something, and eventually I went and got MRIs, and I got CAT scans, and my brain looked at it, and I was told that my brain's fine. I was told that I'm fine. And maybe doctors even felt like it was psychosomatic, but I know it's not. I know it wasn't. I was hurt. I didn't have brain energy. I had brain problems. I couldn't sleep right. And that's what happened to me. And that's my story. So I went from a kid who loved life, who was a young, popular kid, eventually got into sports, loved sports, I always had friends. And then unfortunately, because of what happened at home, my father dissolving, falling into depression, it sucked because it was like, I was the type of kid who like, I felt I had a lot of promise. I feel like I had and have a good personality. I'm respectful. I've learned how to get people to like me. When I meet them in person, I smile, I look in their eyes, I'm tall. You know what I mean? I've got that Jimmer Fredette swag. I'm a lot like Jimmer Fredette. Like, he just smiles. You just like him. He doesn't even say a lot. You just like him. He smiles. And he's just he's a nice guy. And that's kind of how I was. Right. So, but then I had this negative, pink elephant at home. Right, this pink elephant in the room at home, and it messed me up. I felt angry at life. I felt angry at the universe for why my father was this way and why my home was so damaged, and why can't I just be, I wanted to be these kids who just had good parents. There's a lot of kids that lived in good neighborhoods and they had good parents, and I wasn't necessarily envious of them. I was just I was mad that I wasn't that. I was mad that they got to be that kid who had good parents. They could afford things for the kid. I never could afford. My parents could afford nothing for me. The only time I got things is when I had to go work. When I hit 16, I was working at restaurants and I was buying myself shoes and clothes because my parents couldn't. They couldn't afford it. Right. I was doing that in addition to playing basketball and trying to get a basketball scholarship. And I had a chance, but I messed up right before my senior year. I had a chance. I was being recruited, sort of being recruited. I had colleges who were sending me letters. They weren't offering me a scholarship, but they were sending me letters saying, come to our maybe come to our college. Not big colleges, smaller colleges. I could have walked on, or I could have, I still could have, I could have got grants and loans or FAFSA, which I eventually did, but at community college. But and so that could have been my route to a successful life, a better life, and it didn't. It didn't happen. And this is a lot of people's stories. And I'm not sitting here and saying I'm not happy. I'm not sitting here and saying I didn't make the best, even though those circumstances happened. I did, but what I'm trying to say is that I have to talk about that background, about my life, in order to explain, why I became mgtow and why I understand how society treats men, why I understand personally how women treat men. Because during this time, because I had this unique perspective where I was on the basketball team, I was popular, I was slim, I was good, I was fairly good looking, people liked me, and women noticed, girls noticed. So I always had pretty quality girls who would smile at me and talk to me, and I would get numbers. But then something happened. It was always like, once I got the number, then I got shy, and I was, because I didn't have confidence because of what was going on at home, because of what happened in my life. I didn't have that cockiness, that assertiveness that girls like, and they picked up on it. They could tell I was depressed. They could tell I was hanging on by a thread. I was poor at any time. So I was just one tragedy or one setback away from losing everything, losing my social status and not being on the basketball team anymore. I was struggling sometimes to make it to class because I was tired. I couldn't sleep right. I had a lot of anger, and it caused me to have, I wasn't calm and throughout the day, and I wasn't normal. Right. So they could pick up on that. And it slowly got to the point where I started to realize at some point that this isn't working with women. I like women. I want a girlfriend. It's not working. I'd have a girlfriend every now and then, few and far between, really. And then I would get one, and for instance, like I think I had a couple when I was in like sophomore year, a couple in like junior year. I'd have girls that were interested, and it would get to the point where like we would go out and they would be bitches, or they would be whatever. And then there was one that I had and that I really liked in ninth grade, and I would get crushes. Like I was looking for love, and I wasn't just looking to have sex. And a lot of them knew that I wasn't looking to have sex, and they backed off because that's all they wanted. And then I had one who, I dated, and she cheated on me with my friends, and she was just looking to mess around. But she still dated me and acted like she wanted to be my girlfriend, and like it was all emotional, and it wasn't, So as I went on, as I progressed, I realized that, hey, my social status is allowing me to have access to, the most attractive women. But on the other hand, I started to think in the back of my mind, well, why do they like me? And I realized it was because I was on the basketball team. It wasn't because of me. It wasn't because I was so funny, because I wasn't. So it was obvious. It was obvious why they liked me. I wasn't super funny. I mean, I was funny. I was a good, like I said, I was like a Jimmer Fredette. But when it came to women, like I would get nervous around them. So I couldn't display any type of, value that way. Like they talk about in Pua now, they talk about displaying value. They talk about, being funny and cocky and bantering. I couldn't do any of that because I was so nervous. I would get terrified around girls because they had this kind of power where they did put pressure on men. And that's part of what sort of caused me to be resentful towards women, because they had the ability to sit back and they didn't have to produce anything socially. They didn't have to they just naturally had social status because they were pretty. So they didn't really even have to try. And they felt like it was something that was assigned to them. They felt like they somehow deserved that. And they didn't work for it. They were just born pretty. And that's something that has hit me deeply in life in general. People who are just born into that type of privilege. And that is a privilege. Being born good looking is a privilege. It comes with all kinds of, I think it was Family Guy who, it comes with all kinds of perks and benefits. And I think it was Family Guy who, when Peter, he got social, if you go back and watch some of the older seasons of Family Guy, there was this one episode where he got facial reconstructive surgery, and he got fat reduction surgery, and he started working out or whatever, and he looked super hot. And then all of a sudden, people are starting to open doors for him. And I mean, like, I mean, figuratively, they were opening doors for him. Like, come to our club, come to our, he was in this like good looking guys club. And he would get things, he would get these social perks and these social benefits just for being good looking. And I really do believe that's what it's like. And that's scary to think about. It's scary to talk about, right? But I think that's how women are. We're good-looking women, more so than men. I think they both good-looking men and both good-looking women get social perks like that. They're part of a sort of club, and they can have sex with whoever they want. But I think it's both men and women to some extent. More so women. It's easier for women, and it's just this undeserved sense of self-accomplishment. It's undeserved. It's an undeserved sense of self-worth. And I started to resent that because I knew that I was working my ass off. I had a hard childhood. I had to overcome, pain from my father leaving. I was at home with my mom. We were on welfare. She was on Section 8. I was struggling. Nobody was buying me nice clothes. I had to go work for my clothes. I had a few good clothes that I preserved in good condition that I bought, at Ross or, discount stores or whatever that I got over the years. And I've always been this way. I took care of my stuff because I knew that I didn't have the type of money to easily replace things. So I took care and I worked hard. Nobody gave me anything. So here I was working hard, practicing basketball, all my free time, basketball, dribbling, shooting, trying to get better, constantly. And it paid off. I played on the varsity basketball team. I lettered in basketball. And here they didn't have to do anything, and they were already popular. They just had to show up, keep themselves in good shape a little bit, and everybody loved them. Everybody just because of the way they looked. And I felt like that's so unfair. And it was a deep feeling. I felt that deeply. I felt like it was a deep sort of injustice. And it really changed me my last few years of high school because I realized this is what was happening. It changed me deeply. So that contributed to me understanding what it's all about, understanding what society is all about. Here I was working hard, and I got success because I worked hard. I got social status because I worked hard. And then women would come to me, and I wasn't the greatest looking guy. I'm good looking, but I'm not like, wow, he's so like that wasn't why people liked me. It wasn't like women liked me, like I'm passable, like I'm decent enough. Right. But, that wasn't why they were attracted. It was because of my social status. And I figured this out. I realized that when I'm at home or when I'm out on the street, people don't know who I am. Women aren't like coming up to me and hitting on me. But when I go to school, like I have some kind of social clout. Oh, he's on the basketball team. He's a jock. He's different. We have to treat him different. We have to treat him with kind of this reverence. Women were attracted to that. So I realized that was a microcosm of society as a whole. Why are famous people, why do they get anything they want? They're treated like gods. Why do famous guys sleep with thousands and thousands of women? Will Chamberlain said he slept with 20,000 women in his lifetime. That's 1.2 women every day. I think they did some kind of statistic. That's 1.2 women every day. They did some kind of estimation, right? That's insane. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if that's exactly how many, but that's his estimate. And I think he's telling the truth, but it might not be that much. It might be 10,000. It might be 5,000. Maybe he overestimated. I don't know. But that's just women lining up after every game. Why? Just because, it's not because he's the greatest looking guy. I mean, he's a handsome man, but because of his social power. They don't line up outside a bus driver's door. They don't line up outside of mailman's door. They don't line up outside of the guy who works at the butcher shop's door. They don't line up outside of a guy who works on a boat. It doesn't happen. It's because he's famous, because he has social status. People revere him. And that led me to see, oh, okay. This is bullshit. These women are bullshit. It's not just, oh, hey, I'm attracted to you. Let's talk. Oh, you're a decent person. You're kind. Yeah, we could hook up, or we could date, or we could have sex, or we could fall in love, or any of that. It was always based on my ability, your male ability to produce something. What's your income? What do you do for work? Right? That's what started me. And every girlfriend I've had since then, it's there. It's there. And so I had a sickness and I couldn't work and I couldn't support myself. And I went to college, but I only went part-time, and I was dealing with a disability. I had depression. I had insomnia. I couldn't sleep. And this is what I dealt with in my 20s. And it hit me hard, because I did go from being a basketball player and feeling that, feeling that, nostalgia is not the right word, feeling that ecstatic, oh, I want to be about, like, I did revel to some extent, to some degree, in the notoriety that I got. I loved being popular, and I loved the way people treated me. But at the same time, I was able to step back from it and look at it for what it was and realize this is fake. I still loved it though. You see what I'm saying? This is fake. This attention that I'm getting is not real. I probably would have been popular either way, because I'm just, people like me. I'm smiling. I would have been nowhere near as popular as I was if I was on the basketball team. And it happened my senior year. In a sense, I'm thankful that this happened, because it showed me I had 1 year to learn, and I did learn. When I moved from Eastern Washington to Western Washington, I went to my senior year and I wasn't on the basketball team. And I learned how people treat you when you're not a leader socially, when you don't have high social status. I was a nobody. Nobody cared. Very few people cared. Some people could tell that I was tall. Some people found out that I was good at basketball because I went and played in these tournaments at school, and they were like, wow, this guy's really good. And I was really good. And people were like, wow. I mean, I practiced all the time, so I was good. But I wasn't the type of good where I was good in games. I wasn't killing it in games. I wasn't scoring 20 points a game. So I wasn't going to be a college star. But I was good enough to where I could do awesome moves and really score a lot. And people would be like, wow, like, he's a really good street baller. And I also had the ability to play organized basketball. I was in shape. I could run. I could defend. I could block. I could pass really well. And I became a really good player by the time I was in my early 20s. But I had to quit because it wasn't doing anything for my life. Like, wow, I'm a great basketball player. So I could see myself in 10 years at 30, me saying this to myself at 20, oh, okay, I'm a great basketball player. Well, what's that going to get me in life if I can't go pro? I could have went overseas, maybe. I probably could have if I had tried. I just didn't have the right encouragement. I probably could have. I think I probably had that kind of skill. I'm only 6'2", I could have probably played in China, or could have maybe, when I watch those guys, I'm like, yeah, I could play in that league. By the time I was 25, if I would have kept at it, I could have played pro. I felt like, but because I wanted to play in the NBA, it wasn't a real goal to me at that time. And I walked away from it. And it's hard when you spend your whole life your whole childhood wanting to be something, and then it gets taken away from you, or you just realize you're not going to make it. And so, some people might say I quit. I mean, I did quit. but I didn't quit like, well, I'm defeated. I quit. I quit because I felt that it was more realistic for me to live my life as opposed to giving my life to this thing that I didn't know if it was going to work out. There was a big possibility that I wasn't going to make it pro in any level. And some people stick with it. I didn't. I didn't want to. I gave up my whole teenage years for basketball. It's all I did from age 13 to about 18, which is only 5 years. But when you think about it, a lot of kids are out having fun during that time. They're developing social skills during that time. They're partying and having fun, having sex and whatever, learning about life. They're just, it could be a great time to be a kid. And I was playing basketball for 5 years, all the time, 2 hours a day, probably on average, I would say 1 to 2 hours a day. Always just after I would come home, do my homework or come home and rest and then go play basketball, go play every day for 5 years. So when I hit 20, I was like, do I want to keep doing this? And I did get to a point where I was good. I got to a point where I was, and if I would have kept at it for another 5 years, I could have got to the point maybe where I was a master and I was just killing people. And then maybe people would have started saying, why isn't that guy professional? Why isn't that guy, And there's a lot of guys who live their life doing that and they are not successful. There's a lot of guys like that. A lot of guys, they're like, why he never went pro? And they're famous, sort of. They have notoriety among males. And people are like, why didn't he make it? He's so good. And I felt like that. I watch people like, street ballers or whatever. You can find them. If you're into basketball, you know what I'm talking about. These guys who are super, super good, but they just never went pro. Those guys are broke. Those guys don't have normal kind of lives because they gave their life to a sport and they're in shape and there's certain types of benefits. But I wanted to learn how to live my life and be happy, not vicariously through a sport. And I made the decision to walk away from it. And it was a good decision. I'm happy, but there's times when I dream and I wake up and I still feel like I'm in high school and I wake up and think, oh, it's all good. I feel that same type of way how I felt in high school where I wanted, like I felt this nostalgia. Everybody loved me. Like I felt how Jimmer Fredette probably feels, how he was followed in college and everybody. That's how it kind of was for me on a real micro scale. Nowhere near anything that he was a celebrity. He was like Elvis in Utah. He was getting mobbed by people. It was never on that level like Jimmer Fredette had. But a little bit. I felt it a little bit. And there's nothing else like it. You feel like a rock star. And I don't know if you guys have ever felt like a rock star, but it feels great. It's like a drug. People say fame is a drug. When you get, that type of popular, you just feel a certain way. And particularly when you get popular doing something that you love, there's just there's a connection there where the sun and the moon connects, or the sun and the stars, or the moon and the star, whatever. I don't have the right phrase, but things connect. The stars and the moon aligns, or whatever. I fucking forgot that saying, that phrase, but the stars and the moon align, I think is what it is. But there's an alignment. You're doing something you love and you're being celebrated for it. That's amazing. That's an amazing feeling. Whether you're an actor or you're a rock star or a painter or a sports person, whatever it is, you're on this certain type of different level. And women will jump on that. They like it too. But when it's taken away from you, you're like, oh shit. And then you realize, if I didn't have this status, if I didn't have this type of social celebrity, social power, fame, if you want to call it, or what I had was a microcosm of fame, right? I had high school popularity. because I did something that a lot of people didn't do, then they wouldn't care about me. If I didn't have that, they wouldn't care about me. They wouldn't give a shit. And it was true. They didn't. When I moved to a different city, people didn't know who I was. People didn't talk behind my back and say, "Oh, there's Jason. He's on the basketball team. He's cool." People did that. They would talk about me and say, "Oh, he's this," and then it just, you become popular and you start to, like, I know who Johnny Depp is. I've known who Johnny Depp was from the early 90s. He doesn't know who I am, but I know who he is. So when you have notoriety and you have social pull, people know who you are and know what you do, but you don't know anything about them. You don't even know that they know about you. That's what fame is. It's when somebody does something socially or financially or whatever, and people know about it, and you don't even know those people. So people knew about me in high school, and I didn't even know that they knew. It took me a while to even process that's who I was, and that's what I loved. But I didn't know that I loved it even. I would wake up and I would be happy because I was the man. I wasn't the best, but I was part of a team, and all those guys were popular just because they're on the team. I didn't know what I had even, but when that was taken away from me and I moved to a different city, and nobody was pointing behind as I walked by saying, "Oh, he's on the basketball team." Nobody cared. Then you realize, oh, this is shallow. They don't really like me for me. They just like me because I'm socially popular. I have social status. That's what status is. And it's fleeting, it's fake. But when you're there, you want it. When you're there, you take it, and you're like, "Wow, that's cool." Like it's like having a key that works on all locks in a way. So this broke me down, in a sense, and I started to realize I'm just status quo now. I'm just the status quo. I just have to live life to the best of my ability and try to be happy. And I had to learn how to be just a normal person. And it was very hard. And on top of that, deal with depression, deal with real depression, deal with real, culture shock, moving and not having the same status, nobody caring who I was. There was a certain happiness that I had, a real deep happiness that I had for a while, because I was free from the bonds of having to wake up every morning and go do something that I didn't really want to do. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't really like it, but I always liked learning. I felt out because, like I said, when I was in that Awana class when I was a kid, it instilled something in me where I liked achieving. I liked getting good grades. I liked that teachers liked me. I was respectful and kind. I liked all that, but I hated waking up in the morning. And I hated going to school because I just felt that it was shit. And I liked learning, and I'm glad in a sense that I learned, and I'm smart. And I learned how to think, and I learned how to write, and I learned some good things, some good tools that'll stick with me for the rest of my life. But I hated this prison that they put me in, this school where I had to go and learn some crap that I didn't really want to learn, even though I liked learning. I still didn't really want to learn it. And on top of that, I was a student athlete, so I had to, sort of keep up appearances and act like I was elite and sort of pay attention more and be a leader. And I was pretty fairly good at that, but it was hard on me to be consistent every single day because I had depression from not having a father, because I had depression from having a bad childhood. And so I had no counseling. I had no outlet of how to deal with that pain. I didn't even know what to do with it. I didn't know how to think or how to feel. It was there. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to live with it. I sort of just ignored it, and I did my, and that's hard because I wasn't healed. I was damaged emotionally from my father leaving and being poor and feeling like I was different from everybody else and wishing that I had a good childhood, wishing that I had more love and things like that. And I didn't. And so I would go to school and I would have this pain. And so I would try to like, do these weird mental tricks where I wouldn't think about it or try to like, I'm going to have a good day today. I'm gonna smile. And it helped a lot that I was on the basketball team. It helped a lot because they sort of just carried me socially. When you are that popular, there's a good scene in this movie called He Got Game, where Ray Allen's character meets Ray Fox's character. Ray Allen's character meets Rick Fox's character at this university. I think it's called State U or some Big U or something like that. The big state university, and he's so popular that women will just do anything. Rick Fox is describing how popular he is, and he's like, man, it's so easy, and girls, they just fall all over you. If I call her up at 3 a.m. and say, come over here and whatever, then she'll do it. And it's just like access, just total, almost like godlike status. And that's kind of what it's like. And I had a microcosm of that. I didn't have it as on that level, but you are that popular. People carry you. You don't have to do anything. You just got to show up. Everybody else just gives you automatic respect, gives you automatic social benefits. It's automatic. And you like that. You're like, wow, that's so cool. So I didn't have to, really do a lot. I just had to show up. But again, like I said, I still felt like I had a good character. I still felt like I had leadership qualities. And that was just me. Some other guys might abuse it differently. Some other guys might just be shitty people, and that's them. I did take some pride in it. I did take some pride. I learned from the football guys taught me that. The wrestler guys taught me that. I observed them, and they took pride in their status. So it was easy for me, to be social per se. It was easy for me I coasted in some ways. However, I had a lot of pain, and I had a lot of, like I said, and it was hard for me to go to school. And eventually, I transitioned, and I realized this is not the same thing. This college, or excuse me, this high school that I moved to, this is not the same thing. This is not the same environment. I'm not being treated the same way. And that was culture shock, and that was hard. It was very difficult. But it was also freeing. It was like I was in a hole, and then I saw a little bit of light, and I had to crawl up through the hole, and it was really hard crawl. It was really hard. And then finally I reached the light. And then it was like, oh, I'm a normal person now. Well, once I got out into the light, with that came the status quo, came with realizing I'm not shit to these women, particularly in Seattle, where there's not a lot of poverty. I think Spokane, where I came from in the Eastern Washington, I think it's like 30%, or not 30%, $30,000 is the average income, which is basically poverty level in today's day and age. Seattle is like 75,000 a year. So there's a much higher status here, and women choose men based on that. It's nature. They choose men accordingly. So I went through this whole culture shock, and then I went through the pain of realizing that I'm the status quo. And this really turned me mgtow because I was like, wow, so you bitches loved me when I was on the basketball team. But once my circumstances changed, I'm not shit to you. You're fake. You people are fake. Your whole gender is fake. You're shitty. And I've met some cool girls over the years, but for the most part, that's what it is. And I've had to deal with my past. I've had to deal with what I went through with my father. I've had to maintain, and it's hard. It's I feel like I'm double disabled. I had the physical problems and I had the emotional problems, and that's a hard thing to deal with, you know. Um, but it showed me just how shallow women are. It showed me just how calculating women are. And I had my ex-girlfriend who, she was the only one who would come over and hang out with me, even though she knew I lived at home with my mom. And then eventually even she, you know, said I was a loser. Eventually, when we broke up, she even said, "Oh, and I realized when we broke up that she even had these hopes that I was just gonna I was gonna go work and or go do whatever and get a house for her." And she had this I'm the female. There's this kind of latent belief that because they're the female, that the guy's gonna go work for them and get them a house and do these things for them. And me going through what I went through as a child and transitioning to an adult and going through what I went through right as I was transitioning to adult, from being popular to being a nobody, I got a strong sense of justice, social justice, when it comes to how we treat men. And I realized that men are a commodity. And I realized that men are utility to women. And it hit me very, very deeply, where I realized I don't like being sized up and judged and my worth being attributed to how much money I make, to what I can provide for a female. On top of that, I have no choice because I'm sick and I can only do what I can do. I have hard, personal circumstances, physical circumstances. I have a disability. And I learned just how much most women will put that kind of pressure on a man's finances, and just how much it matters when I lost my social status. When you have social status and you're good and everything's fine, you don't see it as clearly. You don't see it as clearly. But when it gets taken out from under you and you lose your status and you go to a lower status, that's when it becomes crystal clear. And you can see exactly how they treat men. And it is hypergamous. I highly, highly am convinced of that. Most of them, it's hypergamous. It's hypergamy. They choose men based on what they can do for them. The higher status men than them. It's real. And I was able to figure out a way around it because I was charming and I adapted. I no longer could use my social status, so I adapted and I learned how to be a bad boy. And I learned how to get sex. And I was able to use some, PUA techniques and to get girlfriends. And I lied a lot too. I lied about what I did, and I didn't tell them, wasn't honest that I was sick, and I wasn't honest that I had depression and things like that. And I'm fully convinced that if I would have told the truth, I would have got nowhere. If I wouldn't have been honest, or if I wouldn't have lied and I would have been honest, then I would have gone nowhere. Most of them would have ran away, if not all of them. I wouldn't even have, got a fling. So the ones that did stick around were the ones who really actually didn't really care that much about dating me long term. They were just in it for the sex, which is, bad in and of itself. People think, oh, well, that's good. No, that's not really good, because we all want love. I wanted love, and I could never find it because it was attached to what I did for a career. It was attached to how much money I made. it was attached. It came with their strings attached. Women were interested in me only as far as I could, as far as they could, you know, use me in a sense. And I feel like it's using. I feel like you are using somebody if, you know, why do women go, oh, he's a loser, he's poor, he's broke. You always hear this kind of negative back talk that women do, but behind closed doors, because a man and his money is very important to them. And I have always had a strong aversion to that. I've always been very strongly against that. And more so, it became more prevalent when I got sick. Well, I can't say always. It developed. So I sort of started to see it. Like I said, I started to see it in high school when I was being treated differently for, the way that, my having social status and being on the basketball team. So it was when it started when I started to see it, started to develop, and it became crystal clear when all that got taken away. And I moved to a different environment, and I was a nobody, and I didn't have any money, and all of a sudden I was thrown into this mix of, what can you do for me? What kind of car do you have? How much money do you make? What's your career? And it was like all the good-looking girls were like this. And that's horrible. That's horrible. That's disgusting humanity. That's a nightmare, if you ask me. That's why there's millions of men in mgtow. That's why there's guys who have gone their own way and who's red-pilled and walked away. And I respect that because they're honest and they know women only want them for their money, for what they can provide, for the house that they pay for, the bills, the mortgage, the car. That's sick, man. We live in a sick society that does that. And that's what I learned. And that's what hit me deeply. Which is why for a long time I had no conscience. I didn't care if I slept with a girl and used her, and I didn't care because I knew she was using me. She only wanted me for one thing. And this is what happened with my ex. She, we broke up, and she told me how she really felt. You don't have a job. You haven't had a job for a long time, and this, that, and the other. And I said, her friends were dissing me or whatever. And I said, well, who are they? Do they know me? Were they with me when I was a child? Did they walk in my shoes? Were they with me when I got sick and went to the hospital? When I had breakdowns? Were they with me when I was struggling with not sleeping? Were they with me when I was going through personal pain and was thinking about killing myself and suicide and the worst things that I ever went through in my life, emotionally and mentally? Were they there? Of course they weren't there. But yet they have formulated an opinion about me and my life and who I am based on some outward things that they see lacking. And they've never even talked to me or sat down and had a conversation with me. And you're going to listen to what they say over me, that you spend time with, that you have sex with, that you cuddle and hold on to at night. You're going to believe what they say over me. You're going to follow what they want. That's, I don't know what to call that. It's like being stabbed in the back. And I know I'm not the only one. It's not just my story. Guys lose their jobs and their wives leave them. Their wives' friends are saying, he's no good, he's a bum, he can't get another job, leave him, find somebody else. Is that love? Is that good humanity? That's a disposable society. That's a paper plate society. And that's what we live in, man. And it's sad, and it hurts, and I know it because I feel it and I live it. My worth and my self-esteem socially is based on what I do. It has nothing to do with, well, I'm a good interior designer, even though I'm poor, I have a lot of nice things and I have a nice apartment. I read a lot of good books. I'm well read. I can quote Shakespeare. I can quote Socrates. I can quote Henry David Thoreau and Voltaire and Nietzsche sometimes. Anyway, it's a different story. But I'm politically, you know, grounded. I have political ideals. I believe in the civil world. I follow laws. I have a good character. I work out. I try to stay consistent. I treat other people with respect. I treat other people kind. None of that matters. It's just your social status, how much money you have, what you can do. And like I said, I learned how to be a bad boy. I learned how to override that. But I knew because I knew how women treated men. I knew that it mattered. So I was able to get sex because I could be a bad boy and I could talk my way into it. But when it came to love, when it came to a girl sticking around, all about my status, all about whether or not I could get her a home. And I've had girls who believed in me, who sort of knew my story, like my ex. She would come over. She knew I lived at home. She knew I lived with my mom. She would come over, and I think she believed in me that I was going to come out of it. And she wanted me to get her a house. She even said, I believe in you, certain times, but she was not very communicative. So I didn't really know quite what she was talking about. She was a lot like my dad, very, very quiet, very introverted. But she was also slutty and she cheated on me. So while she was doing that, she still expected me to have this social status, even though she wasn't faithful, even though she wasn't even communicative or supportive of me. She still expected that I do this for her because she's the woman. And guys will do that. They'll let her cheat, and then they'll still offer her, if they got a good job or if they got a house or whatever, they'll still offer her that type of commitment. And that's the last I heard from her, was that's what her boyfriend was doing. She wanted to go mess around on the side. She was very sexual. And yet she would come home to him because he had a steady job. And he was just this whatever kind of looking guy. And it's like, she wins in a sense. Does she win or does she lose? I don't know in the long run. I don't know. I don't know what you call that. And it's heartbreaking. It's hard. Because you think, what a piece of shit. And I loved her. And you love a piece of shit, and you're like, she couldn't love me because she wouldn't want to be with me because I'm sick or whatever. And she thought I was going to get better and it didn't. And there's nothing you can do but move on, obviously. But you think there should be some kind of justice for that. There should be some kind of karma. She shouldn't be able to just so easily get a guy with that track record. And to some extent she lies and she wants to hide that because she knows that she's a commodity and she's got to put herself out there, and it might not work out with this guy if she's not careful, if she doesn't play her cards right. But then she'll find another person because guys are just disposable. We're paper plates. She'll find a guy who will support her and she can come home and they'll share an income, and then she can go out and sleep with guys on the side. Craziness, man, craziness. And yeah, I know that's not the type of woman for me, but when you spend a lot of time with somebody, you begin to love them. You begin to, and I made that mistake. I made that mistake. You begin to sort of love them and you begin to miss them, and it hurts when they backstab you. It hurts when the truth comes out and they feel like, I've always thought you were a bum, but I just came over to have good sex or whatever, whatever. And when they purposely manipulate and don't tell the truth and omit certain things, how they feel, and they don't communicate, and you realize that person's shady, and you realize, you know, life is shady. How people treat people is shady, you know. And yeah, I'm to blame to some extent for playing the game, for wanting sex, and but it's normal. I mean, we get hit so hard. There's so much pressure on us men, and we barely are even able to get the bottom line benefits. It's hard for us to even get a woman to have sex with. And women, they just choose the guy he's cool, he's a bad boy, he's got the money, and then they'll sleep with that guy. And those are the perks of being. And that's why you got guys running around, talking shit to other guys and talking down on other guys. And you're a beta, and I'm such a man, because they're hyping themselves up because they know that that's what women want. Women want the cocky guy. Women want the guy, uh, you know, who is into himself, the narcissistic guy, because this is what women want. And it's sick. The whole thing is sick. Guys can't even get laid without being bad boys. We can't even get laid without. And I was talking with some guy online, and he was like, normal guys get laid. You just got to go outside and try. And I'm like, dude, you're a retard. You don't think I go outside and try? You don't think I go to, go out and talk to girls and socialize? You don't think I'm on online dating and I try to? No, we have to be something else. We have to be bad boys. We have to have social status. We have to have good jobs. We have to dress. And something about us has to be above. Women do not sleep with average men. It's their biology. They don't choose average guys unless he's got a good, steady job, and then they'll choose him for that. So at the end of the day, you have to be extra. You have to be something special to some degree, whether you're a bad boy, whether you're whatever. I know because I'm a guy. I live this. Other guys live. I'm not just complaining. We live in this weird culture where, like, if you talk about how bad things are, if you talk about if you talk about some real stuff, then you're complaining and you just suck it up. Well, it's like they want people to just suffer. Like they don't want things to get better. They're just like, oh, well, things are the best. It's like this weird kind of like carryover from the baby boomer generation when they didn't complain and all they did was work hard. And so they when the kids complain, they're like, don't complain. And then it becomes this like thing where like, don't complain. Well, why shouldn't we complain? I mean, I get it if we're like, oh, yeah, it sucks that I got to actually work hard for something. Yeah, you got to work hard for things. But when there's obvious injustice, when there's obvious imbalance, and when there's obvious things that are not fair, people say, well, life isn't fair, buck up. And, well, yeah, sort of. But, when we're struggling and some asshole who's got a good job or some asshole who just figured out how to be a bad boy, he gets laid and he has no problem, and guys are struggling, it sucks because we got to jump through hoops. We got to go on patrol. We got to put out applications. We got to market ourselves. It's not easy for women that, like I said, they just go outside. Any guy at any time will come up and sleep with them or date them or take care of them. And it's fucking easy to be a woman if you're decent looking and you're not super fat. It's so easy. Even super fat women, it's just like it's like guys will take care of them, guys, and it's like it's so imbalanced. And it sucks and it hurts. And we got to talk about it. Men are committing suicide. Men are being marginalized drastically. And it's hard because this is the truth. And men are taught not to complain. We're taught to be stoic. We're taught not to be emotional. Buck it up, suck it up, keep going, work harder, because we're utility. Does the horse, I saw a horse downtown the other day when I was out with my friend, and it looked so miserable. Its whole demeanor was just depressed, and it was broken. It was like a robot. It was like, this is my life and it's horrible and I'm just living it. And I've seen men like that. That horse wants to be in the pasture. He wants to be on a farm. That's where horses are supposed to be. Men are supposed to be with women. Men are supposed to have love and support from a woman. Society has taken that away from us and told us we can only have women if we're famous and rich and have a good. And I'm not saying like, okay, we'll never get a woman. I mean, like, it's a little different. I have high standards. I don't want to go settle for someone who I'm not really attracted to, someone who I don't think has a good character, someone who I've just got to put up with, even though I think that we don't have good chemistry, even though I think that we aren't compatible. We don't have compatibility. I've never found that. When I do attract a woman, when I finally do get a woman, get laid or get a girlfriend, she's not the right one. She's not good looking enough in a certain way. She doesn't take care of her body. She has a bad temper, or she has a bad, work ethic, or she's not very intelligent, or there's always something. And it sucks when all the good women are chasing after the guys who got money. And they don't have, because their parents failed, and they don't have the type of humanity and morality to say, I'm going to look for a man with a good character. I'm going to look for a man who really loves me and who's kind to me and is compassionate and faithful. No, they go for money, looks, status, confidence, cockiness, social pull, etc. Right? None of those things are being a good person. None of those things are having faithfulness and showing that you're going to love her for her whole life. And it's sad. It's sad when you want someone like that, and all you can get are these hoes because you don't have a good job, or because you're sick, or because you're not great looking, or whatever. And some people right there might be like, well, if you're not that good looking, you can't expect to choose somebody who's really good looking. Well, yes, but we do see guys who aren't great looking with good looking women all the time. So that's not quite a great argument. It's like saying, well, anyway, you get my point. Looks matter, but compatibility matters, character matters, how you get along, how you treat each other, that matters a lot. But when you take that out of the equation and all that matters is the guy's money, his looks, or his status, let's even take looks out of the way. When it's just money and status, and when it's social pull and popularity, right? Then all that other stuff that's really important, like compatibility, like how do you get along, personalities, are you guys similar? Do you have, good goals and character, those type of things that would be really wonderful and create great families and create great relationships don't matter. And all that matters is status and money. That's sad. There's something drastically wrong. And this is why a lot of guys are mgtow. This is a lot of what's going on. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Yeah, I've been wanting to make I've been wanting to talk about how I became mgtow a lot, and it's been difficult for me to really get into it. But I think that covers it, and I think that is an obvious. Maybe why a lot of other guys go mgtow. Something happens, you know, they lose their job, they lose their woman, and a lot of guys have it worse than me. A lot of guys actually do really well, and they are successful, and they get married, and then something happens where they lose their job or their wife cheats on them, and then they get screwed out of a lot of money, and they got to pay alimony, and then they become mgtow. I'm thankful that that didn't happen to me, because I probably would have been a lot more bitter than I am. And I'm not saying I'm not bitter. I'm not saying that to some extent I'm not hurt. For some reason, that's like a bad thing in society, where like, if you're emotional, if you're hurt, if you show any types of emotions, you're a loser or something. It's like, no, we're human beings. If we're having a hard life, it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to be depressed, because that's a normal reaction. If guys are getting screwed over and getting friend zoned and can't get a girlfriend because they don't have a good job, I would think that they would be depressed. That makes sense. And to talk about it is human, and to want to change it socially is human. And I think that's noble. I don't think that it should be the way that it is. I think women should treat men better and not like utility and not be hypergamous. I hope that it does change. And it's okay to talk about it, and we should. Because we're constantly being reinforced as men and taught that, oh, we shouldn't talk about our problems. We should just keep going forward and persevere and, carry on, power through all this bullshit. Be stoic. Don't talk about your problems. Yeah, and that's how guys go crazy and kill people and commit suicide or be angry, or even maybe not that hardcore, maybe just be angry and beat their wife or abuse their children, or maybe even not that hardcore, and maybe just harbor resentment, silent resentment that is sort of passed down to your children. How many guys who actually finally do get a woman or have a family, and they harbor a lot of resentment because maybe they don't really fully love their family. Maybe they settled for a woman they don't fully love, or maybe it's hard on them that they feel like they got to work all the time, and they don't talk about how they can't be emotional, and they can't talk about their problems, and they just harbor it inside, and then then they get tumors, or it becomes an emotional burden, and it sucks their life out from under them. And this happens a lot. A lot of men out there are silently suffering. I forget who it was. It's some philosopher. He said the mass of men, you can Google this quote. He said the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. I forgot who said that, but it's a perfect quote. The mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. Not the mass of women, not the mass of anybody else, but men. Because it's not cool for us to complain. It's not cool for us to talk about our problems. We're not supposed to do that. And this plays into men being utility. And I hope it changes, and I hope we can change it, and we can spread information and awareness, etc. So I want to end it there. Thank you guys for listening. Jason Levi, Northwest Podcast.